Early in 1989, I noticed that some of the vans on the streets of Galway were different. I would notice that because 90% of them, I would say, that I lettered anyway, that were local. At the time, I suppose I didn't question about who was doing them or what was doing them. But a friend of mine walked into the workshop one day and he said to me, "Manus, the signwriter as a job is dead in the water. A computer is doing it now." And I was very surprised, shocked, could be another word. But I'd been a signwriter at that time and out on my own for more than 30 years. And it was early days, but I was wondering, was this the end of an era? Has je vlog? Has je vlog?
Ja.
For the past 40 years of my life, I've been known as Manus Duggan, signwriter, on billheads and in the telephone directory. But the story of how I came to be Manus Duggan, signwriter, is my story, I suppose, in a way. If I was to say this tomorrow, I suppose I'd be on a completely different tack. But my memories of school, actually the first day at the top of the lane here, and just at the back of our house, Prospect Hill, where I grew up. My mother came to the front of the door, I remember, of a morning, and Micheál Feeney, who was a boy she knew, and she asked Micheál what school did he go to, and he told her he went to the Mon. So she went down with Micheál down to the Mon, and that was my first school day. It's so funny nowadays when people are choosing schools and all that. I was nearly 6 years of age at the time. My brother Eddie went with me that first day, and Eddie was 18 months younger than me. Now, for the next 6 years or 7, I went to the Mon. We actually could hurdle our way to school in the morning. There was no traffic on the road. We'd go down to the square just outside the Bank of Ireland, and there would be nothing in the square, and we could hurdle to our heart's content with the sponger or with the tennis ball. And then we'd leave and we'd walk down to the Mon through Shop Street. On our way home, I remember McNally's was beside the Connacht Tribune in Lombard Street, and we'd look in at workers in there. McNally's were one of the biggest contractors in Galway, building contractors. Probably going up Prospect Hill, there was Newell's at the bottom of the hill, and there was a forge there, and we'd go in and we'd look at horses being shod, because that was the era of the horse and cart, and deliveries were made by horse and cart and by drays. Actually, my father worked in McDonough's, and that's what he'd done at that particular time. He delivered coal around Galway. That was the Galway we grew up in. It was a Galway of shops and timber yards. McDonough's had many different enterprises. They had a manure factory where Jury's Hotel is now. There were some years where Daddy worked. He worked there as well in night shifts. Looking back, Galway was a very grey city. In the summertime, toffs would be in Mayor Square, and that was a very, very lively time for 3 or 4 weeks. Summertime also meant swimming in Rinmore on the Barracks Beach. That would have been during the Second World War, and there were hundreds and hundreds of soldiers in the barracks, and they'd be all camped out. From once we'd eat our dinner, we'd go up and we'd mingle with the soldiers on the beach and swim out to the raft, and those were very, very happy times. I don't think I ever gave thought when we were going to school about what I would do when I grew up. There were very, very few outlets for actually any skill at all. There were boys in my class, a few boys in my class, who their dads were plasterers and carpenters, and they would say that they would go into their dad's trades. There was a coffin maker, I remember, and he was going into his dad's trade. And but my dad was a farmer's son, and like a lot of people that I would have grown up with, they were all father's sons, because my dad, like all his close friends, all came in from Clear Galway and that area, and they actually lived like farmers in Galway. We grew our own potatoes in plots around the town. We cut our own turf, and actually we were called country gawks. In other words, I suppose, spoiled country people. But I suppose when we were growing up, school was something that you done. Everyone went to school and you went along. It was to get to 14 years of age. 14 was when you left the mall, and then you went out and got a job. And getting a job was not easy in Galway. I just gone 14, and Brother Louis came to me one day, and he was the principal of the school, and he said there was a job in Commons and Grannies in Shop Street, and I started working there the following Monday. That would have been February 1948. I was 14 years, and I was still in short pants. I worked in Commons and Grannies for about 2 years, and Eddie, my brother, had started working at Connacht Laundry, and he had applied for a job in the coach building for him in Foster Street. It was Fahy Brothers, and I was about 17, as I said, when I started working in Fahy's, and I knew by the time I was 21 or 22, if I wasn't good at my job, I wouldn't be able to hold it down, and I would definitely be on the immigrant ship. The other thing about that time was that expectations weren't great. The money wasn't great, but and there was nobody making big money. There was no signs of affluence around. There weren't cars, and there weren't people with flashy clothes, or except for those that had big businesses in town. It was a great place to grow up in. If you don't envy anybody, you're quite a happy person. And even though times were hard and they were poor, people were happy. Horses came off the road very early in the 50s, and commercial vehicles began to increase. And Fahey's became a very, very successful builder of commercial vehicles. And Mr. Fahey made the decision that no van would leave the premises without being lettered, because he said a van without lettering was a box. And the signwriter there at the time left in 1953. I was able to do all the painting at that time. So a signwriter, Don Feely, began to come into Fahey's. Don became aware that there was plenty of work in Fahey's for me to do if I could do it, because when I had served my time, and if I wasn't able to signwrite, I was out of a job. He had 2 apprentices, and he brought the 3 of us to his house every Wednesday night for the next 2 to 3 years. It was on the prom, where the car park is now, beside Sea Point, and there he taught me how to signwrite. And for that I've been thankful all my life. Paddy Burke's and the Galway Oyster Festival were synonymous for most of the event's existence. And I done the sign for Paddy Burke's in the 50s for Fahey contractors. And it's still the same signs, but I remember doing it in Galway. There was one thing that Don always taught me, and that was, I suppose in a way, the sign, what it says to me today is like, that even at that stage I was quite a good signwriter. The thing about signs are, they haven't got a very, very big lifespan. I think that is the longest sign that's still serviceable that I've done. That's still there, that's original. Most of my work has passed. Lots of people used to say, "You're very good, Duggan." I always knew that in a way, I was as good as my last job, because there was always room for improvement, and I perfected the skill, which was in its infancy when he told me that I'd be able to hold on the job in Fahey's. In other words, that he wouldn't come in anymore, that whatever plans they had to do, I would letter. Okay. It's one of the most important things in life, that you never know enough about your job or skill. And if you've got somebody to emulate, you're very, very lucky. And that's why Don was such an important part of my life. The 12 pins in Barna, it was really the gateway to Connemara, and there was a very nice hotel and restaurant there, and we done this sign 30 years ago, probably 35 years. It's a Roman letter, and yet at the same time it has got certain Irish feel about it as well. The main thing I learned from John was that a signwriter doesn't draw words, he draws letters. So it was very, very important that I knew the alphabet and the shape and form of letters. There were basically, it was Roman fonts and sans serif, but for a signwriter the most important is Roman lettering. It has a history going back 2,000 years and it hasn't changed, so that to do Roman lettering down to a half an inch lettering after that is no problem at all. The thing about Roman lettering is the serif, which comes from the time when the chisel created lettering on stone. There are manuscripts today. The most popular when John was teaching me was commercial script, but every signwriter would develop his own script, and I had a particular free script that I used in a lot of my work, especially connecting different styles on a van or on commercial work. Of course, the first thing I had to do when I went out on my own was build a workshop. And I think from some old photographs in the house you can see there was a piggery at the end of our garden where we used to keep a pig. And Tommy Duffy next door, he gave me his piggery and I built a workshop across it. And that was my workshop for the next 40 years. Actually, it was my workshop until the turn of the century, and I just handed back the keys, I think, just this year to Duffy's. There was never an agreement, there was nothing, it was just a verbal agreement between the two of us. It never had planning permission, it had no permission. So it didn't. Times have changed, so they have. But actually, that was the only agreement Tommy and I had. He said, if we ever needed Manus, he'll hand it back. And I said, yes, Tommy. When people talk about signwriting, they assume that shop fronts and signwriting go together. But I was brought up in a different school. I was brought up in the area of vans and commercial vehicles. I had chosen that route as my main breadwinner. So I had Fahy's work to start with, which was substantial really, and I built on that.
I'm gonna be a wheel someday. I'm gonna be somebody. I'm gonna be a real gone cat. Then I won't want you. Everything's gonna go my way, and I won't need nobody. I'm gonna be a real gone cat. Then I won't want you. You can cry. You run ha 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 ha. You be wondering why I don't look at you when I go rolling by.
There was something special about a van. Lettered in the 50s, 60s and 70s. They made a statement about the business and were a business's calling card really, and I suppose the signwriter shared in that. I was known in the garages as the man with the box, and I suppose it was a pretty true reflection on what I brought to a job. My brushes, a chalk line, a tape, maybe a straight edge. I had a maul stick for steadying the hand, maybe the design for the van, and paints. Matty Hanley, a cousin of mine, who had the Renault agency in Galway, used to always joke at me. I spent years building up this business, he said, and you walk in to the garage, he said, with your business, and you're carrying it. There was a bylaw passed by the corporation in the mid-60s about shop fronts. Most shop fronts in Galway were cut plastic, and they decided that all new shop fronts had to be done in timber and lettered. So it created a new avenue for the Signwriter, or at least it reclaimed some of its popularity. And over time, new signwriters came on the scene. I enjoy doing shop fronts, but if I got 20 shop fronts in a year, I would be doing well. But that would be only 20 to 30 days work in a year. In pound, shillings and pence, it doesn't work, or it wouldn't work for me. And the business from them wouldn't keep food in any signwriter's table, really. So, whereas I'd done them for maybe a distraction, and it was nice work. But my bread and butter was a lot more commercial. It was in the vans, and as time went on, in other forms of commercial art, really. Businesses changed their vans frequently, especially small vans. And you knew that the business was repeatable, really, like, that they got the vans done regularly. The next big thing in the 70s was the regeneration of Galway, and there were building sites slowly beginning to rise around the outskirts of the city, and that was a very, very good area for my business. The signs that you see around today on building sites, that was the beginning of them. Next came the auctioneer, or real estate agent, and it was the beginning of a lot of the auctioneers that have been there for the last 40 years. T.J. Colleran, the Heaslips, O'Donnell and Joyce, all came from that era. No one foresees how a place is going to turn out, My role, let's say back in '67, or when I went out on my own, was to be a signwriter in Galway. And in playing that role, it was a privilege, to see the city change in that time to what it is today, and playing a small part in that change, and being in so many different projects, in so many different cultural events that go to make up the Galway that we know today. I think the next change was that there was town planning for the first time. Slowly, Galway began to improve. City centre was beginning to look beautiful for the first time, I suppose, in a century. The rivers and canals were looking great. Around the city, building estates were growing, and industry was beginning to come to Galway. The university was also increasing its capacity, and students began to come in big numbers. So that was the Galway of the early 70s. The regeneration of the centre of the city was evident to everyone who came back, especially. They could hardly know the city they grew up in. I lettered everything from cranes to digger jumpers, from vans to aeroplanes. I suppose between 1969 and 1990, 90% of the site boards and building construction in Galway. I done them. I had an inside view on what was going up in any part of Galway. I would get the brochures and planning for the site. So that way I played a very, very small part in the growth of the city because I knew the ways it was growing and I knew the people that were doing it. Everyone in Galway grew up with the Galway races. And I think the proudest thing I'm of is that I worked for the Galway races for 40 years. For 30 years of that, I done all the signage. The Galway race course lent itself to signs because it went from left to right, and the signs were very effective. And I was always very proud of the whole layout, and I think it's my proudest moment in a way. I've never went to the races. I always looked at it on television to make sure that everything was looking well, and it was the end of the year in a way because everything was geared to the Galway races, work-wise, and it was a new year afterwards. There were a few films made in Galway, The Macintosh Man. I remember doing Donovan's Bear for that. And that was in the film. I've seen the film many times.
Three cheers for Sir John!
I also made road signs. But I think Paul Newman was going so fast in the car chases that I never saw them anyways. I remember changing the faces of the docks once for a film called North Sea Hijack. Roger Moore was the star of it. I covered a lot of the signs there, including McDonald's Fertilizer. It was to be a Norwegian port where the boats were calling to. So I made quite a bit of money on it, but it was never shown in the film. It must have been edited out. The person responsible for the project in Galway called into the workshop. The drawings were perfect for all the things that they wanted done, and I enjoyed the whole project. I took some photographs of it, but I think they turned out, I took them from a distance, and I don't know whether they were never satisfactory. Looking back, the work was so varied at the time that it would be nice to recall them in pictures at least, but nowadays it's completely different. There are cameras on everyone's shoulder, and like papers, magazines are recording every event that happens. At that time, they weren't, and I'm surprised that I have as much as I have really, but looking back, I didn't record all the things that happened at that time, or at least most of what happened. Festivals were very, very common up and down the country, and Jack Leonard of Guinness's, who was responsible for outdoor advertising for the country outside of Dublin really, put an awful lot of work in my hands, and it was for festivals, from the Cork Film Festival, the Rose of Tralee, Galway Oyster Festival, the Galway Harp Festival. The Castlebar Song Contest actually turned up for a few years. And so you could nearly plan out your year, through festivals. The highlight of the Salt Hill Festival was the Irish Show Jumping Championship in Salt Hill. So for the number of years that ran, because it was on national television, my signs filled the screen really in a beautiful setting, and that was a very enjoyable enterprise to be part of, with Sean Ash and Paul Duffy, who organised it. A signwriter brought 7 or 8 items on a job, but there was only one important tool, and that was his brush. The brush was what it was all about. And it took a while to break in a good brush. And I could have 4 or 5 number 8s, which would be a very important brush and doing big jobs for me. And I would be working on 2 or 3 of them at a time. And when you got a good one, you were happy for quite a long time. And you nearly had a relationship with it in a way. On that day in '89, I became very aware of vans around Galway that were lettered by computer. They were too good to be true in a way. There was a clarity, especially in sans serif lettering, that it wasn't possible for a signwriter to do with the brush. We made inquiries about what was doing the lettering and what the computer cost, and later on that year we went to O'Sullivan's in Dublin and bought our first computer, and for the next 5 years it was partnered with the brush in my workshop. I suppose at that time I was not far off my 60th birthday, and well, the eye wasn't improving, and definitely the maul stick was more important, keeping the shake steady. So looking back, it was the best thing that could have happened to me. What I brought to the computer as a signwriter was probably what has served me for the last 20 years. And that was a good eye for lettering and all the other important things about layout, spacing, how to present a sign properly. So it didn't change that much my work style really. I still always felt like Manus Duggan the signwriter. The only job that I still do as a signwriter is the winner's Galway plate board at the Galway races. The only reason I can do this is that it's one stroking, because my hand is shaking so much now that it's nice to be able to do it, at least to do this. In life, it's funny that whatever path you take, that there's always somebody who's walking beside you in a way that is willing to help. I've often said to people since, they said, how did you become a signwriter? And I would say that I met a man who gave me his hands, because he gave me the gift to signwrite. That helped me to bring up a family and to walk through 40, 50 years of my life with my head held high. Because I had a work, I had a skill that made a man of me in a way. I suppose I walked proud.